Gentlemen, let me tell you something that most men over 60 have never been told in a doctor's office. There is a fruit, widely available, inexpensive, and eaten daily by populations with some of the lowest rates of prostate inflammation and chronic fatigue in the world, that contains a combination of enzymes, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds that modern research is now confirming can meaningfully reduce prostate swelling, restore cellular energy, and support the hormonal environment that determines how a man over 60 feels and functions every single day. Most men in this part of the world walk past it in the grocery store without a second glance, and most men over 60 are sitting with a prostate that is quietly enlarged, an energy level that has been declining for years, and a body that is working harder than it should against a background of chronic inflammation, and they have accepted all of it as aging. I want to challenge that acceptance today, because the research says something different. I'm Dr. Jocelyn Carter, and I've spent over a decade working with men over 60 on the intersection of nutrition, inflammation, and men's health. The kind of clinical and evidence-based work that connects what you eat to how your body actually functions at the cellular level. Today, we are talking about papaya, why it works, how it works, and exactly how men over 60 can use it to address prostate swelling and restore the kind of energy that most have quietly stopped expecting to get back. This is not a superfood story. This is biochemistry. And by the time we finish, you will understand not just that papaya matters, but precisely why and precisely how to use it. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me one thing about your energy or your prostate health that you've accepted as just part of getting older. You may be surprised to find out how much of what you've accepted is actually negotiable. Let's start with the problem, because understanding what is actually happening in the body of a man over 60 is the only way to understand why this fruit is relevant at all. By the time a man reaches his 60s, two things are almost universally true. First, his prostate has begun to enlarge. Benign prostatic hyperplasia, BPH, affects more than 50% of men in their 60s and up to 90% of men in their 80s. The conventional explanation is hormonal, specifically the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, which drives prostate cell proliferation. That is accurate. But what is less commonly communicated is the role of chronic inflammation in accelerating and sustaining that enlargement. Research published in urology and oncology journals over the past 15 years has consistently shown that inflammatory cytokines, the chemical messengers of chronic inflammation, are present at elevated levels in enlarged prostate tissue, and that they actively promote continued growth and cellular dysfunction. The prostate is not just responding to hormones. It is responding to an inflammatory environment, and that environment is something nutrition can directly influence. Second, his mitochondrial function has declined. Mitochondria, the energy-producing structures inside every cell, become less efficient with age, particularly under conditions of oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. The result is not just tiredness. It is a specific, pervasive depletion that affects physical stamina, mental sharpness, mood stability, and the capacity to recover from exertion. Men describe it as feeling like their battery no longer charges fully. And they are, in a biochemical sense, correct. The mitochondria that power their cells are operating below capacity, and chronic inflammation is one of the primary reasons why. These two problems, prostate inflammation and mitochondrial energy decline, share the same upstream driver, and papaya addresses that upstream driver through several distinct, well-documented mechanisms. The first mechanism is enzymatic, and it is the one that makes papaya genuinely unique among fruits available to most men. Papaya contains papain, a proteolytic enzyme found in high concentrations in both the flesh and the seeds of the unripe and semi-ripe fruit. Proteolytic enzymes break down proteins, including the fibrin deposits and inflammatory proteins that accumulate in swollen, inflamed tissue. Research on systemic enzyme therapy, which has been studied in the context of prostate inflammation and BPH, has documented that proteolytic enzymes consumed orally can exert meaningful anti-inflammatory effects in prostate tissue by reducing the protein-based structural components of inflammation. Papain is among the most bioavailable and well-studied of these enzymes. When consumed in adequate amounts through fresh papaya, it enters the circulation and begins working systemically, not just in the gut, but in the tissues where inflammation is occurring. For a man with a swollen prostate, this is not a peripheral benefit. It is directly targeted at the mechanism driving the swelling. The second mechanism involves lycopene, and here the research is particularly compelling for men over 60. Papaya is one of the richest dietary sources of lycopene available, and the lycopene in papaya is in a cis isomer form that research has shown to be more bioavailable than the lycopene found in tomatoes. Lycopene is a carotenoid antioxidant with a specific and well-documented affinity for prostate tissue. It accumulates there preferentially, where it neutralizes the oxidative stress that drives cellular damage and inflammatory signaling. Multiple large studies, including analyses of dietary patterns in populations with low prostate disease rates, have consistently associated higher lycopene intake with reduced risk of prostate inflammation and BPH progression. The mechanism is not mysterious. Lycopene reduces the oxidative environment in prostate tissue, and a less oxidatively stressed prostate produces fewer inflammatory signals and undergoes less aberrant cellular proliferation. This is your body's own regulatory capacity being supported by the right nutritional input. The third mechanism is the one that connects papaya directly to energy restoration, and it runs through vitamin C and the adrenal system. A single medium papaya contains more than twice the recommended daily intake of vitamin C. Most men think of vitamin C as an immune nutrient. What they are rarely told is that the adrenal glands, the organs responsible for producing cortisol, adrenaline, and the hormonal stress response, have the highest concentration of vitamin C of any tissue in the body. Under chronic stress, aging, and inflammatory load, adrenal vitamin C is depleted rapidly, and adrenal function becomes dysregulated. The result is a pattern that many men over 60 recognize immediately: fatigue that is not relieved by sleep, a flattened stress response, a sense of being perpetually running on low reserves. Replenishing vitamin C through whole food sources, particularly sources like papaya, where it is accompanied by bioflavonoids that enhance absorption and utilization, supports adrenal function in a way that isolated supplementation often does not. Men who increase their dietary vitamin C through whole food sources consistently report improvements in sustainable energy and stress resilience. This is not coincidence. It is adrenal biochemistry responding to adequate substrate. The fourth mechanism involves beta-cryptoxanthin, a carotenoid present in papaya that is less well known than lycopene, but no less significant for men over 60. Beta-cryptoxanthin is a precursor to vitamin A and functions as a potent antioxidant with specific documented effects on joint inflammation and systemic inflammatory markers. Research published in rheumatology and nutrition journals has found that higher dietary intake of beta-cryptoxanthin is associated with significantly reduced levels of C-reactive protein, one of the primary blood markers of systemic inflammation, and with reduced inflammatory joint symptoms in aging populations. For men over 60 who are dealing with the compounding effects of inflammation across multiple systems, prostate, joints, cardiovascular, metabolic, beta-cryptoxanthin works as part of a broader anti-inflammatory nutritional strategy. The prostate does not exist in isolation. When systemic inflammation is reduced, prostate inflammation responds accordingly. The fifth mechanism is the one that most directly addresses mitochondrial energy, and it involves the unique combination of folate, potassium, and magnesium found in papaya in highly bioavailable forms. Magnesium is required as a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body, including the reactions that produce ATP, the actual unit of cellular energy. Research consistently shows that magnesium deficiency, which is extraordinarily common in men over 60 due to reduced dietary intake and increased urinary excretion with age, directly impairs mitochondrial ATP production. Men who are even mildly deficient in magnesium produce less cellular energy, not because their mitochondria are irreparably damaged, but because the machinery lacks a critical input. Papaya provides magnesium in a food matrix that enhances absorption compared to many supplemental forms, alongside potassium and folate that support cardiovascular function and cellular repair. When men over 60 restore adequate magnesium through consistent dietary sources, the improvement in energy, sleep quality, and muscle function can be substantial and relatively rapid, often within 2 to 4 weeks of consistent intake. The sixth mechanism involves the gut, and specifically, the relationship between gut microbiome health, systemic inflammation, and both prostate function and energy. Papaya is rich in soluble fiber and contains unique prebiotic compounds that selectively feed beneficial bacterial populations in the gut. The connection between gut health and systemic inflammation is now one of the most robustly supported areas in nutritional medicine. When the gut microbiome is dysbiotic, imbalanced toward inflammatory bacterial populations, it produces lipopolysaccharides and other compounds that enter the circulation and drive systemic inflammatory signaling. This directly affects prostate tissue and directly impairs mitochondrial function. Improving gut microbiome composition through consistent dietary fiber and prebiotic intake is not a slow or uncertain process. Measurable shifts in microbiome composition can occur within days to weeks of sustained dietary change. Papaya, consumed daily, provides the fiber and prebiotic substrate that shifts the gut environment in a direction that reduces the inflammatory load on every system in the body, including the prostate. The seventh mechanism is hormonal, and it connects to the conversation about testosterone and estrogen balance that is directly relevant to both BPH and energy in men over 60. Papaya contains isothiocyanates and indole compounds, particularly concentrated in the seeds, that have been studied for their effects on aromatase activity, the enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. In men over 60, rising estrogen relative to testosterone is one of the hormonal drivers of prostate tissue growth. Dietary compounds that modulate aromatase activity in a balanced physiological direction can support a more favorable testosterone to estrogen ratio without the risks of pharmaceutical intervention. The research on this is preliminary but consistent, and it is one of the reasons that cultures with high papaya seed consumption show interesting patterns in men's hormonal health data. Including a small quantity of papaya seeds, approximately 1 teaspoon of fresh seeds daily, which have a peppery, slightly bitter taste, alongside the fruit is a practice supported by both traditional use and emerging research. The eighth mechanism is the one that makes papaya uniquely suited to the biological reality of men over 60, and it is the fruit's effect on the vascular endothelium. The same endothelial dysfunction that drives erectile difficulties and cardiovascular risk also contributes to the poor tissue perfusion that leaves the prostate and surrounding tissues in a state of chronic low-grade ischemia, reduced oxygen and nutrient delivery. Papaya's combination of vitamin C, lycopene, and polyphenolic compounds has been specifically studied for effects on endothelial function, with research showing improvements in flow-mediated dilation, a direct measure of how well blood vessels expand in response to demand, in men who consumed papaya-rich diets consistently over 8 to 12 weeks. Better vascular function means better tissue perfusion everywhere: prostate, muscle, brain. It is a systemic benefit that compounds over time. Now let me give you a practical, specific protocol, because none of this matters unless it translates into something you can actually do starting this week. In the first week, Your goal is simply to establish the daily habit. One medium papaya per day, roughly 300 to 400 grams of flesh. Consume it in the morning when possible, as the enzymes are most active on an empty or lightly fed stomach. If fresh papaya is unavailable consistently in your area, semi-ripe papaya is preferable to fully ripe for higher papain content, and frozen papaya retains most of its nutritional value. Eat a small quantity of the seeds, approximately 1 teaspoon, alongside the flesh. They are edible, and the compounds in them are not present in meaningful amounts in the flesh alone. In weeks 2 and 3, pay attention to 3 specific things: your urinary flow and frequency. Men with BPH often notice changes in urinary symptoms within 3 to 6 weeks of consistent anti-inflammatory dietary change. Your energy pattern across the day, specifically whether the mid-afternoon depletion that many men accept as normal begins to flatten and stabilize. And your sleep quality. Magnesium restoration often manifests first in improved sleep depth and reduced nighttime waking, which itself compounds energy improvement during waking hours. In week 4 and beyond, layer papaya into a broader anti-inflammatory dietary pattern. It works most powerfully when it is not surrounded by dietary inputs that drive the same inflammatory pathways it is working to quiet. Reduce processed seed oils, refined sugars, and ultra-processed foods, not as a complete overhaul, but as a consistent directional shift. Add other lycopene and polyphenol-rich foods alongside papaya, tomatoes, watermelon, berries, to compound the anti-inflammatory effect on prostate tissue specifically. One practical note on sourcing. Papaya is available fresh in most grocery stores year-round in North America and Europe. Look for fruit that is yellow-orange on the exterior with slight give when pressed. This indicates adequate ripeness for maximum lycopene content while retaining meaningful papain activity. Organic is preferable if accessible, as papaya is among the crops with higher pesticide residue rates in conventional farming. If cost is a constraint, frozen organic papaya is a practical and nutritionally sound alternative. Gentlemen, I want to be direct with you about something. I am not telling you that eating papaya will eliminate an enlarged prostate or replace medical care for any condition you are managing. What I am telling you, and what the research consistently supports, is that the inflammatory environment driving prostate swelling and energy depletion in men over 60 is profoundly responsive to nutritional input. And papaya, consumed consistently and in adequate amounts, delivers a specific combination of enzymatic, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory compounds that directly address the mechanisms underlying both of these problems. The men who make the most meaningful progress with their health after 60 are not always the ones with the most dramatic interventions. They are often the ones who identify the right foundational inputs, the things their body actually needs to do what it is capable of doing, and apply them consistently. Papaya is one of those inputs for prostate health and energy. The evidence is real, the mechanism is clear, and the cost of trying is a piece of fruit. If this video gave you something useful today, a new understanding, a practical step, a reason to reconsider something you had accepted, share it with a man over 60 who has given up on feeling better. Because giving up is not the only option. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. Your body retains a remarkable capacity for improvement after 60 when you give it the right inputs. And the research we covered today shows clearly that something as accessible as daily papaya can begin shifting the inflammatory environment, driving both prostate swelling and energy decline in meaningful, measurable ways. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.